Hi, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you all for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to spend a few minutes with me to talk about the flipped classroom, also known as flipped learning, flipped pedagogy. It's really starting to have a host of other names as well. I just wanted to introduce myself a little bit and let you know that I'm currently an associate professor at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, and where I work primarily in the graduate programs. I have my both my undergraduate and my FMP centered masters from that program, but then came back here to Colorado. I'm a native of Colorado and got my PhD from the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center, my PhD in nursing, and have been a nurse educator for a number of years, much like many of you, I'm sure. I have worked in a variety of different programs, different specialties and foci, and I have loved every minute of it. One thing that I love about my job is the research aspect of my job. So, listed there, you can see I have some OB women's health background, my FMP research. I've done some research on pediatric obesity, primarily with prevention at the primary care level. And what's more applicable to what I'm going to be talking about today is my research in nursing education. I've done some on interactive PowerPoints in the context of cognitive load theory, and then most recently have been doing some research and working with the Flipped Global Network to work on some evidence-based strategies for flipped classroom. So I also have a publication coming out very soon, studying current views of students about flipped learning. It's really a pretty cool article in my opinion, because the students were able to experience both an instructor who did straight lecture and my flipped classroom in the very same semester. So they had a unique point of view, I believe, in telling us or telling me about what they thought about the flipped classroom, the positives, the negatives, and what they found to be some of the biggest challenges. That way we can work from the other end of their comments and really learn to improve this pedagogy for nursing specifically. So if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to take a very short moment to talk about what is the flipped classroom. Most of you probably already know what the flipped classroom is, but just as a quick review or maybe a short introduction, we note that the traditional classroom has really been about students doing any of their readings at home, coming in and having lecture from any host of instructors or professors. Students are asked to sit and listen to lecture. However, sometimes, they may have some Socratic method, or perhaps the students are asking questions, but primarily, as you can see in this little tiny picture here, the instructor is the center of the classroom, and the instructor is feeding information to the students. The instructor is in control of class time, in control of content of what is being taught, and the flipped classroom is very different than that. So you can see the little picture of the student watching a video. So anything that you would lecture on is actually recorded ahead of time and put on some sort of web-based device that the student can download and watch prior to coming to class. They also have some readings and other things that help, or maybe activities that help them focus on what is going to be done in class. But class is not about everybody sitting and watching the instructor talk about what they know. You guys may already know this, but you know a lot about the subject. You don't need to be the focus. The students don't know. They need to be the focus. So the students become the center of the classroom, and the faculty member becomes the guide on the side who helps to facilitate learning in an active manner. Okay, next slide, please. So flipped learning, even within the last year or so since the book came out, we've really been focusing on thinking about how flipped learning is different. A lot of folks will say, I already do flipped learning, but really what they do is maybe active learning strategies. So they're right and they're wrong. Flipped learning is really about interactive learning. And if we are straight lecturing to students, we don't have much of an opportunity to have that interactive learning piece. It's also about individualized teaching. So if you have 30 students in your classroom, if you have 60 or 90 students in your classroom, you all know that you're going to hear from about 10% of those students when you ask a question. You're going to be hearing from the students who have most likely done the reading and most likely understand. Of course, there are also some of those students that don't understand and feel very comfortable raising their hand and asking a question, but that is actually, in my experience anyways, less common. It also changes the way that we engage with the students. and that we are able to correct their thinking and error in real time. So we don't have to wait until a test and say, oh my goodness, Susan X really bombed the test. She must not have understood. We actually have the opportunity to understand that Susan X didn't understand it in the classroom. We can correct that thinking, help student X learn it in a correct format or manner, so that when she does test, her knowledge really shows through. The last thing about flipped learning I think I will say is, and if any of you have tried flipped learning, you already know this bullet point, it does take some work. It doesn't just take work from the faculty member that is going to flip the classroom. It also takes more work and effort from the students who are going to be taking your class. So flipping the classroom in nursing is a big feat to take on. Why might you consider using the flipped classroom model? Again, kind of back to that interactive learning mode and the engagement of students in your classroom. Assessing student in real time, being able to more deeply understand each student's knowledge base and connect with them, and help them correct some errors in thinking. We want to move the classroom into the 21st century. We know that students are already using a host of technologies. We can catch up very easily with these user-friendly technologies and start using them in our classroom. And I'm assuming some of you are already doing that. Also, research is proving that the flipped classroom is very effective. Flipped learning is evolving, and it is becoming more evidence-based than it was over the last 5 years. So you might be asking the question, when do I know that I'm ready to flip the classroom? Go ahead and turn to the next slide, please. So you might want to say, can I access and use screen capture software? Screen capture software is just a fancy word for being able to record your lecture and post it in some manner online so that the students can have access to it prior to class. I've actually just got an email this week from a student who was thanking me for the videos. She says that they are easily downloadable. She can watch them on any mobile device. She watches them before she takes her test again, and it just helps to re-solidify what she has learned in the classroom with me. And the students really love that. I mean, we are kind of teaching a technologically savvy student population. And they do appreciate it when we get into their world and use some of those methods for their education. The next question might be, do I have some space for the active learning that I want to do in the live classroom? I'll have to be honest with you all that this is one of my biggest challenges. I teach in an institution that has lecture halls for the most part. However, it is changing a little bit. So when you have a lecture hall or you have seats and chairs that are all focused and pointed toward one direction, which is typically the podium where the instructor will do a lecture, it is not conducive to the active learning that you want to do in the live classroom. There are definitely ways around this. You can move some of the chairs and things like that to make group work easier for students. Students really don't mind, in my classrooms anyways, for the last several years, have not minded being on the floor or in the hallway, but that can cause some problems with other programs, other classes that are in your institution. So really thinking that through is a big step. Have I discussed this method with my students and negotiated buy-in? I think this is one of the biggest mistakes I made when I first started flipping the classroom. I thought the students were going to just be so thankful to me that I have brought this wonderful, engaging method to them, and they were less than appreciative. And part of that may have been that they did not really understand what I was doing, and I was really pulling the theoretical lecture rug right out from underneath them, which caused a lot of angst and anxiety with my students. So I've learned from that, and now I make sure that I talk to each new group of students that I have about the method, what it is, and there are some good strategies I think in the flipped learning text that I've written to help you with that piece. The next one is, do I have time to create the flipped classroom? Oh my goodness, don't talk to me about time, right? It really does take some time. But like many other methods that you may have tried in your nursing education career, if you put some effort in this up front, you will be able to do minimal work with it later on. It's very similar to when you create this wonderful lecture on maybe hematology and immunology, and it's just this beautiful lecture. And it took you maybe 17 hours. I'm not sure how long that would take you. And that's a lot of work up front. But then the next year, what you do is you take that beautiful product, you revise it, you tweak it, you update any guidelines, you look and make sure your references are still current, and then you can deliver that material again, and you don't have as much work. So maybe that's an hour, hour and a half. It's really the same thing with the flipped classroom and the videos. The really nice thing about being able to do a flipped class more than once is that what didn't work maybe in the in-class space the first time, you can really tweak that and make it work for the next time. The other thing that should probably be on evaluation slides, but I'm going to say it now, is that students are really good, especially graduate students, which is the majority of the students that I teach, are really good at letting you know what you did well and where you could improve. And I'm okay with hearing that because I want to improve and I want to make sure that I give them the education that is meaningful and helps them actually learn. So if you just ask the students, if you have 5 minutes at the end of your flip, the class that you have flipped, just ask students, what did you like about today? What was your favorite part? What part did you not like? And they will be very honest and help you really perfect your method. Do I have a flipping colleague to help me? When I first flipped the classroom, and you can read about this in the book as well, I did so with a really good friend and colleague, Kat Johnson. Now, this was very helpful for me because I was able to bounce ideas off of her and say, Kat, I'm thinking about this in-class method. Do you think it's going to work? What am I not thinking about? Two heads are always better than one. That's why we pair and share in the classroom for some of our activities. So having a flipping colleague is very helpful. If you can't find a flipping colleague, there are a number of online communities that you can kind of plug into and be able to find some flipping advice and get some questions answered. The last bullet is, do I have good tech support at my institution? This can be very important, not only for yourself, but for your students as well. If you're not a very tech savvy person, you may need some help at the beginning with some of these tech pieces. But by and large, most of the programs, any of the kind of activities that you're going to be doing in terms of tech are very user friendly these days. So I'm thinking that you're not going to have too much of a problem once you learn and get over that learning curve of each tech method that you want to use. However, if you can go to a class, for example, on how to use the screen capture software at your institution, that is going to really help. You can also alert the tech support center that you are working on flipped classroom that they may get some questions and give them an FAQ, for example. So if a student calls in and says, I can't access the video, what do I do? Then they have an answer for them. Or they could maybe use your email and contact you and say, I'm trying to help this student, what do I do? Most of the time, the students just contact me and I take care of it. But every once in a while, especially on the weekend, students are protective of your time and will call IT instead. So moving on, what are some flipping best practices? Well, the flipped classroom is really evolving. It's actually a really exciting time to be involved in the flipped classroom and to be involved in higher education. As you probably know, the flipped classroom started in the K-12 realm of education, and now it's really becoming global. It's moving into higher education. We're seeing many more whole conferences that are focused on flipped learning both at the K-12 and the higher ed level. And I want to give a little plug for John Bergman, who is one of the pioneers, along with Aaron Sands, but this is John Berg's website, the Flipped Learning Global Network, where I am a research fellow at the current time. And the website is there for you. If you have a hard time finding it or you can't click on that link, you can just put Flipped Learning Global Initiative, or you can search John Bergman, and this will come up with 2 N's. And there are just a host of wonderful resources on this website. I really go to it almost daily. John has also prepared some certifications for level 1, level 2, and trainer. And I believe he just came out with a new one. I think I just got a email about that as well. And there are lots of different webinars similar to this one that you can sign up for and really learn a lot about the method before you jump in with both feet, like I did, and make some mistakes. So once you understand how to flip and are doing it well, you can think about layering your strategies. and you want to educate yourself in order to be successful. And John Bergman has on his website, and I went ahead and put this, it's not a direct quote, but the educational malpractice piece is directly from John. And he believes that not educating ourselves on how to do this method or any method that you're going to implement in teaching and learning without understanding fully what you're doing is akin to educational malpractice. Those words are a little bit sharp, but I think it made me in particular sit up and say, whoa, malpractice. I'm a medical professional. I'm an FNP. I don't like malpractice. But when you think about it, we really do need to be educated on methods that we're going to launch with our students and know that it's something that we can do successfully prior to jumping right in. So you might consider purchasing a text on flipped learning. There are more and more available every year. And of course, I would love you to purchase our text on flipped classroom with nursing. But there's also a host of research that is becoming available on the method that you are more than able to get at your fingertips. And again, all the websites that you may find. However, some of the websites out there are really focused on K-12 more than they are higher education. But I am telling you, I have really been able to gather some great in-class activities from those K-12 teachers. You know, they really have some basic ideas that work very well regardless of how old your student is. So keep your method student-centered. Make sure you are focusing on that interactive learning to meet objectives. Every once in a while in the flipped classroom, you may need to pull students back to the board, back to you as the instructor. If you're walking around and they're doing group work, for example, and you're recognizing that each group is getting the same thing wrong or they're misunderstanding the same concept, you can always take it back to the board, do a little mini lecture on that. And then, or the other thing that I like to do is if one group is getting it really solidly and the other groups are really struggling, then I empower that group to get up and do a mini lecture and teach their peers. After all, in nursing, we are going to be teaching a lot of our time. We're going to be teaching families. We're going to be teaching new nurses that are coming in and working with us. And we're going to continue to have to teach ourselves as the medical literature continues to evolve. Remember that this is not a one-size-fits-all method, and I think that might be one of the biggest problems or downfalls for nurses in particular. We think, oh, you do it this way, and that's the way you always do it. But really, everything should morph to what your objectives are for that particular class, that particular module, and it should morph, like your in-class activities should morph to what you really need to have the students learn for that day. So it is not a one-size-fits-all. So after you get done, how can you evaluate your attempt? I'll have to tell you that students' initial reactions can be very misleading. I am right there with the students that anything that gives me more work, I am initially not going to like very well because it gave me more work and I had to work harder and it took time out of my other busy life, things that I have to get done. But I really did find in my qualitative study on what do the students have to say about flipped learning, that students do have resistance at first, but by the end of the class, they are very appreciative of the method. They're very appreciative of the one-on-one time that they get with the faculty member. And they always, always, always say to me, I learned so much in this class. And then I always kind of retort to them, do you think it's because you worked so hard? Because they did. They worked very hard in my classes. How did you feel about the attempt? Many times, especially like maybe right in the middle of a method or right in the middle of an active learning thing, you're thinking to yourself, oh, this is not going well. And you just have those initial reactions. You can always take those and revise and do better the next time. Were you able to meet your learning objectives for the day? I think that's a big one for me. And then if I'm not able to meet all of the learning objectives and I have to carry some stuff over, I'm okay with that now. I used to get really stressed out about that, but I realize if the students are getting a deep understanding and learning about some of the topics that I want to cover, then we can wait for the other topics for later. Students may or may not be prepared for the live class. It doesn't really matter, to be honest with you. They're going to learn in the flipped classroom. And I will tell you that probably 80 or 90% of my students will say to me when they haven't been prepared, man, I got to go back and watch that video that everybody else knew more than I did, or that activity. Do you feel like they learned the material? That is what we are measuring. We are not counting heads or counting the number of times that a student watches a video. What we really should be counting is, was there knowledge transfer? That's what we should be interested in. Were the students asking good questions? Oh, I love this one. I tell the students they have to ask questions until they stump me, and that's their goal for the day. And I'm so embarrassed to say that they do it almost every day, but then I learn something too. And then we're all learning together, which makes it so much more enjoyable experience. Were there things that the students asked that you could not answer or had to look up? That's actually a good thing. And then we talk to the students about how to self-learn, self-teach, and engage with other resources that they need to find out the information. And were the students engaged and actively learning? So the next thing I want to talk about just a little bit is the technology that is out there for flipped learning. I had to just briefly touch on this because I knew we didn't have enough time. I think we could do a whole webinar on technology. Maybe we should set that up. It would be very, very fun. But flipping is not about the technology. I just want to say that first and foremost, it's about you and your ability to teach in the interactive part of the classroom. But there is a lot of helpful technology out there. Of course, the first thing that I had mentioned was the screen capture software program. There are just a number of them out there. I'm not endorsing one or the other. I think that people will find one that works really well for them and that they can use very easily. I don't like to spend a lot of time editing videos. However, if a dog barked while I was recording or I sneezed or something like that, then I just count to myself 1, 2, 3, and then I start that slide over again. Then I can go back to the editing part and clip that piece out where I had sneezed or coughed or yelled at my dog or whatever I happened to do. And that has really saved me a lot of time in my video production. I could make mistakes, clip them out later. So you will find the screen capture software program that really works well for you. You'll learn it and it'll be much easier for you each and every time that you use it. A document camera is a good thing. I have a colleague who is a math instructor who takes the document camera and just points it straight down on a piece of paper. He writes out a problem and he tells the students, you know, with the audio while he's writing, how to do the problem. It really is part of cognitive load and teach back mechanism and mastery, watching somebody else do it. And I actually just noticed that in my daughter's elementary school, she's in second grade, her teacher has started putting videos up to help parents because they teach things differently after you've been out of school for a while. I'm not going to tell you how many years. And then she is saying, this is how we're teaching subtraction and addition now. And then she teaches the students and the parents. It's really wonderful. So you can just use document camera like that. I have used document camera on the book. For example, if I want to talk to them in a physical assessment class about the different parts of a tympanic membrane, for lack of a better example, then I just put that picture down on the in the book, face down the document camera, and then talk to them while I'm doing a video. It works really well. There are whiteboards. These can be low or high tech. There are actually a couple of great apps out there that are whiteboards that you can draw on. I'm a little bit too much of a perfectionist though to just draw on the whiteboard, and I'm not enough of an artist to draw a really good picture. But there are some faculty out there that are super talented with drawing pictures of like pathophysiology or whatever you want to draw pictures of, and you can do that on your computer, you can do that on a regular whiteboard, or you can do it on an app. Oh, the plickers. I love the plickers. I think I have maybe a picture on the next slide. In fact, why don't we go ahead and go to the next slide so I can show. This picture down on the bottom here shows the instructor holding the iPhone. I use my iPad. Again, not endorsing any different types of products. It's just one that's out there. And you'll see that the students are holding up cards that look like code readers, and that's what they are. So then the teacher asks a question, and then the students will turn their card. So this little gal in the front row here with the glasses on, she has her card up, and when it is that direction, then that is A. But if she would turn it horizontal, it might be B. And then if she turned it again, it would be C, for example. So then you scan the room and you see what everybody answered. So this is a real low budget, and fun way to do clickers. You don't have to have your students each buy a clicker. You don't have to buy clickers in your institution and hand them out and hope they all make it back to you. You don't have to worry about a battery going dead or anything like that. You just have to do a little bit of front work and learn how to use them, and they are free, non-proprietary, and the developers have promised that they will always be free. And it's just clickers.com. They're really fun. The students really like them. Student self-made videos are another thing that you can do. I have students, actually, a colleague of mine and myself did a physical assessment course, and we had the students video themselves doing the unit assessment evaluations and system assessments on a family member, coworker, for example. And boy, by the end of by the end of that summer, we had some students that were very, very good at making videos. So we had them write down a list of tips for the next class on how to make videos. For example, one student did not have any way to keep her iPhone from falling over or her device from falling over. So she actually taped it to a ski and put it out from her so that she could videotape herself. They're very ingenious students. It's just wonderful to know how they can use these technologies. Wikis are something that are usually within your learning management system. You can do some assignments within the wikis. You can have students work either by themselves or group work and add to the information about a topic. For example, interactive content pages. There are some that are similar to wikis but aren't wikis in your learning management systems. And apps. There are so many apps. Again, I think we could just do a whole talk on the apps. There's recording software apps, really cool 3D anatomy apps. There are whiteboards. Explain Everything is one of my favorite ones that I use, but I tend to do most of my recording on the computer just because it's easier for me to access. Virtual technology for application in the classroom, which I have not had a lot of experience with, but I'm really excited about learning it. So the next slide, low budget items, screen capture software, document cameras, apps, clickers, those sorts of things. But if you had a really nice budget, you could get one of these interactive whiteboards. And some of you are probably already doing a lot of lectures and that sort of thing on interactive whiteboards. Um, this this is one where you can actually save the information, you can record what you're doing, you can change colors, you can download it, you can email it to the students. They're really quite remarkable. But my favorite of all time in my new institution at the University of Nebraska Medical Center is called the eye wall. And you can see from the picture that this is just a wall, an entire curving wall of interactive mechanisms where the students can come up and learn, or you can put video over all the wall, or you can put sections. You can save materials, you can upload, you can download, you can go to the web if you need to, you can go to YouTube if you need to. There are all sorts of different wonderful things that you can do with this. The next picture shows when they had a preview day for some of the high school students coming to the University of Nebraska, and you can see how each student there is doing something a little bit differently. And it also acts as an interactive whiteboard. So there are certain pins that you can use to write things up top. So I'm really excited to be able to use this with my flipped classroom this summer. I'm going to be teaching some physical assessment with the graduate students. And I can definitely see splitting them into maybe groups of 2 and having them do one thing on the interactive eye wall and then switching and moving in groups. It's just going to be fantastic. I'm really excited to use it. All right, moving on. Seriously, the most important factor is not all of these cool tech things, even though they are out of this world. The most important factor in success of the flipped classroom is you, the instructor. I think one of the things that I got at first when I was doing a lot of the discussions and talks about the book and about flipping was that faculty said, my goodness, if we put all of our lectures online, they won't need us anymore. And I was like, oh, this is just shows that you don't really truly understand the flipped classroom, because the lecture is only a small part of what you do in the flipped classroom. Similarly, I have some students that say, I like lecture. I don't like lecture being gone. Lecture is not gone. Lecture is just recorded and you can have access to it anytime you want. You can turn that on anytime you want. What is most important is how you are going to help the students apply that material when they get to class. With flipping, the live educator is the key to success. So you might be thinking, yeah, I just don't know still. Just remember that the flipped learning pedagogy is a new paradigm. It really is a new set of assumptions and concepts, and it really makes us examine our values and current practices. Because of this, many educators and many students have a hard time because it is change. It is a paradigm shift. It really constitutes a new way of us having to view our reality in education. It's less about the process and more about engaging students and moving faculty into that role of facilitator. This does require faculty to be an expert in their role, and they have to be comfortable not knowing everything. That is okay. And your students already know that we don't know everything because nobody can. So we just engage with each other and help each other learn. So it might be possible that some instructors or educators are stuck in that old paradigm. I've heard all of these things on the left side of your screen. Well, lecture's so much easier. Oh my goodness, I agree. I agree. But what makes me want to change is that I know it's not really effective. Well, we've always done it this way. That should be a red flag or nails on a chalkboard for any nurse. It's just like evidence-based practice. Change is difficult. Yeah, it is. It is a lot of work. It might not work. It might fail the first time. But if you revise it and do it over again, then you're going to have better successes. And just attitudes of kind of like, oh, I'm not sure, if it seems scary or it seems too new or it seems that it might be connected with failure, maybe I'll just go back to my lecture because that's what's most comfortable. I'm telling you this not because I'm making fun of anybody. It's because I have had all of these feelings myself. But at the end of the day, I still felt like my students were doing well on the testing, or it felt almost like they were learning despite of me. So or in spite of me, I guess I should say. The future, teaching and learning can be better. It can be student-centered. We can engage these students and be an inspiration to them. We can help them with application. And my goodness, that's what nurses need, is to know how to apply this material. So I want to encourage you to dare to be different, be that person that shines at your job, do your job to the best of your ability and make a difference. And sometimes that means that we're going to have to shift out of that old paradigm and try to help students in a new and innovative way. Maybe make some changes in your style and approach, change the way that the students are understanding and engaging with the material and engaging with you as their instructor. It can be done a number of different ways. Flipped learning really just provides a template for you to shine in your teaching. So what is this book about? It is a resource for flipping specifically focused on nurses and nursing education. It was written by myself, of course, a nurse educator, but I wrote it for nurse educators. You can definitely use the book in nurse education courses. It works well for that, but at the end of the day, I think it really works well for those of us who are just wondering about this method and need some more information. I feel like it embraces the changes that are really necessary for moving nursing education forward, getting out of that lecture hall and into the world that our students are living in, the world that is full of technology, active, interactive, constantly changing. And we just have to become comfortable with being uncomfortable, which is actually pretty difficult for me, I'll be honest. But we need to be ready to change and accept these challenges that truly inspire our students and inspire other educators to help make nursing education more effective and more applicable. The next slide just gives you an idea of all the different chapters, and it looks like you have been sent a couple of the chapters. The first two, Why Flip the Classroom and Evidence-Based Nurse Pedagogy, show me the research. The reason I called it that is that when I did some talks or seminars or pre-conferences on the flipped method, it was such a common thing for these wonderful nurse educators to come up to me afterwards and say, you know what, this is all good and fine, but you show me the research that says that this works. And so that's why I named the chapter that. And it really does show you the research, that chapter. The next chapter is the intentional instruction model. And that was something that my colleague, Kat Johnson, and I began to develop, and then I further developed and revised for the book. Number 4 is a chapter about how faculty can prepare for the flipped classroom. The chapter 5 I think is very important, preparing your students for the flipped classroom so that they know what to expect and you have less resistance. 6 is offload content. What do you want the students to do before they come to class? Number 7, how do you manage time effectively in the flipped model learning? Number 8 is an evaluation chapter. How did it work? How do I know if I need to change it? Those sorts of things. And then I think probably my favorite chapter, other than chapter 1, because I really got into chapter 1 about why we need to do some changing, is chapter 9, and that is those flipping nursing instructors. So I found some really wonderful, dedicated educators who are already doing flipping, and I asked them to talk about their flipped method and how it's working, and asked them to give me their tips, flip tips, FLIPTIPS, and I love that chapter. So how could you use this text? Definitely as a pre-read, as a guide for flipping the classroom. If you've already flipped and not had success, I think you're really going to like this book because I flipped first, had very poor success, but I didn't give up and I kept doing it. And I think that this book will really help you turn that whole idea of flipping around and give you some new strategies and ideas. And then consider using the model in the book as a guide for your flipped classroom, preparation, implementation, as well as evaluation. And that can go a long way to make you successful. And here, this poor cow in the next picture. So I tried to flip and look what happened. It just didn't work, right? Hey, that's okay. Sometimes we just don't get it right the first time. I didn't get it right the first time, but I didn't give up. I think I could talk about a number of famous rich people, athletes. They didn't get it right the first time. But the difference between those people and everybody else is that they just kept going and didn't give up. And this is me. They just kept trying until they succeeded. So I want to encourage you to retry flipping if you are that cow on the gate. The text may be really helpful. Don't let perfection or your perception of what perfect is be your enemy. I think that was one of my biggest hurdles. Take time to think about where things might have gone wrong, contemplate and percolate how to make that better, and maybe talk to your flipping colleague about that as well. Many times the failure was in the active learning time. So maybe the chapter on managing time may be particularly helpful. Most of the time, if you're able to do your offload content first and really take time with that, that is successful. But then things just kind of went wrong in the active learning phase. So I think the book is going to give you some good ideas about that. And it's okay to fail, but only if you decide you're going to try it again. So I just want to thank you for taking time out with me today to listen to some of my ideas about this really important new and upcoming pedagogy that's out there. And I would love to take some of your questions if we have time for that, Jennifer.
Great. Thanks, Karen. Great presentation. Thanks for showing us all those tips and tricks today. And if anyone does have a question that has come up during the presentation, you can just message me, Jen Sherzay, the organizer. One question that did come up so far, Karen, is someone was asking, what are some of the activity examples that you do in class if you're having them do the lecture on their own?
Oh, sure. So I love case study. I know everything's not about case study, but I feel like case study is really a low fidelity way for students to engage the content. So I do some case studies with them on the topics that we have learned. So they learn those lower level objectives at home on the video and with their reading. And then when they come to class, I give them a really solid case study. Most of the case studies that I use are not from a book. And I put in the book how to help yourself write your own case studies, and they come from practice because I'm still practicing, and I use cases from practice so that they're real. And because of that, many times I have lab values that I can share with them and those sorts of things. So that's one thing I use. I also use something called expert of the day. So for example, when I teach OB topics that are high risk, I actually give the students assignment at the beginning of the year that each one of them is going to be an expert. So for example, gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, for example, those sorts of topics, preterm labor. And then they have to really they have to read all the things, but they have to read extras and get extra resources for the students. And then when they do case study, they are the referral source and the collaborator with the students on the case studies. So for example, if they're on gestational diabetes and they have a question on gestational diabetes, then they go to whoever was the expert of the day. I've also used a lot of call, which is different for undergraduate and graduate, I understand, but I think you could still do a form of this. In undergraduate, you can maybe have calls from physicians on the floor instead of calls from patients. But I think one of the things that really hit me hard when I got out of my NP program was that nobody taught me how to take call, and I had to take call. So I teach my students how to take call, and we do calls that are cases based on what they are learning. So it's usually for emergent material. I've used some group work. I've used some teach back and had students teach each other. Um, Gosh, I'm trying to think of some other things. I like the jigsaw. One of my colleagues at the University of Northern Colorado taught me the jigsaw method, where you have them break into groups of equal size, create a concept map on some topic, whatever topic you're going over, and then you have them switch as a jigsaw. So each group then has one person from that case study or that concept map teaching the other students. And then when they go to the next one, then that student teaches the method, that sort of thing. There are lots of different methods that can be used in the text. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Karen. We have a couple more questions, and thank you for that detailed description.
Uh-huh.
So we have one faculty member that's saying she wants to ask, or he wants to ask a little bit more about case studies. I set up
Mm-hmm.
my classroom around case studies and learning to do research and develop understanding of the subject matter. Most students at my university don't like this style because they are accustomed to a rigid PowerPoint presentations
Mm-hmm.
that are instructor directed and lectured. How do I overcome the need to learn through a rigid teacher directed model? I think that's a
I
great
think
question.
I think that's a great question too. I think just time and educating the students. There's a really neat method that I use, and I wrote about it in the book called the origami frog. And one of my colleagues taught me how to do this method and actually he was teaching us how to do the flipped classroom as faculty, and he did this to us. And so I use it now with my students. And what I do is ahead of time, I split the class in half before the students ever come to class at all. It's one of the ways that I introduce the flipped classroom to them and educate them about how it is helpful. So half of the students I will email a YouTube video on how to fold an origami frog, and then they need to bring that frog to class. Then I have the other half. When we get to class, I introduce the flipped classroom, and then I ask the students to pull out their origami frogs. I give the rest of the students who did not get the video ahead of time a piece of paper, and then I start running the video. And then I tell them, now we're going to have a frog race. Anybody who's ready to race your frog, come up front. Well, guess what? It takes the other students like 20 minutes to try to figure out how to fold the frog while the other ones are racing their frogs. It gives students an appreciation for the fact that if you can do something ahead of time, learn it ahead of time, you can be that much farther ahead when we go to apply the material. It's also been, students have told me that it was also a good motivator for them to be prepared for the flipped classroom in-class activities, for example, watching the videos. The other thing that the students tell me about the origami frog experiment is that the ones who actually have come with the frogs, they say, I had to make this like 5 times. I had to keep rewinding the video. I couldn't figure out how to do it. I kept missing a step. But look at my frog. It's beautiful now. Well, there you go. That's exactly how the videos work. Sometimes you are looking for a pencil when somebody says something important in lecture, or somebody walks by in the hallway outside with orange hair and you get distracted. There are so many different things that can distract a student in a classroom who is trying to listen and hang on every single word that the lecturer is saying. But when they have the video, if they had to reach down for their pencil or their child distracts them during the video, they can always rewind it. It's always there for them. And those are some really helpful ways that I have just really practically and application wise showed students how this really is going to be better for them. So I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Karen. We have a couple of more questions. Jamie's asking, would you give the students time credits for watching the lectures out of class? I work at a clock hour institution.
Thanks for that question. I don't give students any time out of class, and I also don't punish students for not watching the video. I don't like some of the learning management systems have really neat ways to be able to track whether a student has watched a video, accessed it, and watched it the whole way, and all of that. I'm just not into policing my students that way. I mean, I deal with adult learners, and I tell them that right off, and I just say this is part of the preparation. I really believe that you're going to learn better if you watch it and if you read ahead of time and then watch the video. Sometimes I embed some questions in there for them to consider and think about, and then I put those on exams for later. There are a lot of different ways that you can subtly encourage students to be prepared and watch the videos, but I do not give them extra time for it. Sometimes if they are done with their learning activities early and I have a 3-hour class and we get done 30 minutes early, I'm not a clock watcher on that either. I just say, you know what, I feel like you've met the learning objectives for today. Why don't you go home and enjoy the sunshine, if there is any sunshine, that sort of thing. So I really have had to move away from clock watching, really, and I just really focus on teaching the students the learning objectives that they need to understand to be able to be successful in the clinical realm.
Thanks, Karen. A couple of more interesting questions have also come in. So Tia is asking, how do you envision this working in an online environment? And then another faculty member is asking, how were your end of course evaluations employing this model?
Oh, great question. So the first one about online learning, I am still working on thinking about this question. One of the ways that some other faculty have done this, and I tried it, but I didn't get a great response from students because the classes that I were teaching were definitely asynchronous, and the students were not required to come to any sort of live class, even not live, like live meaning like on campus, but even live video, that sort of thing. But what I've had some colleagues do is put the video up and then they have a time every week or maybe 2 times to really accommodate students to come together and really do some learning activities to help them apply the material in a sharing and online format. And most of the learning management systems do have that capability of being able to have a video chat class. If not, there are a number of different resources that can be used. I'm thinking of Skype off the top of my head, but there's also Zoom. There are other methods where you can have more than one person come in to the video and work on things. I've had some students do that for group work where I set up the little chat area for them and they can get in and do work together. And I think John Bergman's really working on this question with his global colleagues from Spain as well, because the time kind of face-to-face and interactive ability to teach the material in my knowledge so far, is really key to making the flipped classroom work really well. But I think we're seeing more research and more ideas out about this, and I'm excited to learn more about it. The other question about the course evaluations, my course evaluations did not change at all. I don't want to sound like a braggart, but I've always had fairly high course evaluations. And I think it's primarily because I do engage with my students anyways. I mean, even when I had lecture, if I could tell that they were zoning out, then I would pull them aside afterwards and ask them what was going on or whatever. I've always had some pretty good interaction with my students, but one of the advantages, or one of my advantages, is that I've had fairly small class sizes. I've had 36 or so or under. I've had classes of 72 before, and it's harder to be able to engage directly with each student. But I think with the flipped classroom, it helps with that, and it helps to differentiate learning. So John Bergman has a webinar coming up that I'm going to be watching about differentiation of learning with the flipped method, and I want to learn more about that too in bigger classrooms. But and to my advantage, I've had some smaller classrooms or class sizes, I should say, just because I teach in graduate programs. So really, I haven't seen my evaluations change at all. But I really enjoyed asking qualitatively my students, what did you think about this? And boy, they told me. They were really honest with me, and I really liked what they came up with. And I think that we can use their information to make this even better for them and more meaningful in the future.
Thanks, Karen. A couple of more questions. When doing CFUs, I do a lot of case studies and I employ the Socrative interactive review. What other ideas would you incorporate into CFU?
I'm not sure what CFU stands for. I've not been
Okay.
involved with CFU, so
Okay. Maybe
sorry.
Kendall, if they're still on the line, they can just
Yeah, just
message me back and we could get to that
give us
one.
the information about CFUs. Yeah, I'm not
Hmm.
familiar with that.
Sure. Another
So,
question from someone who teaches in an RN to BSN program with adult learners who have largely struggled with using
mhm.
technology. Have you found success using the flipped classroom with returning students or non-traditional students?
You know what? I have, and I think the main thing is that when I have a class that is not tech savvy, I don't make them do a lot of tech in the active classroom, if that makes sense. Or I don't make them do videos. Like sometimes I'll have students, I'll say, okay, we're doing flipped, but this week you have to do a video and do a 5-minute video on what you learned and post it to me. And I will look at it. And I want you to post 2 questions about the material that came up. And then we'll go over those questions in class time. So that's kind of a just in time teaching, not like just in time, but just in time teaching technique. And I've done that before, but I would not do that with a group that seems to already struggle. And sometimes I don't think it has so much to do, with their age, because my mom's 84 and she's extremely tech savvy. But it might be that they just don't have the resources, which is another problem altogether. So we have to be thinking about resources for students, nearby libraries, or having them access the university library, for example. But most of the videos, if you use some of the technology that I'm using, the videos are so simple. They're truly just click, hit the arrow to play, hit the pause button if you want to pause, and then hit the rewind. But it's like using a VCR. And that's what I tell them. It's just like using a VCR or a DVR. If you can use a DVR at home, which most of us can, then you can use this method to help you with the videos. If they don't, then I have done some individual teaching sessions with students just in my office to show them how to access and things like that. And if more than one student is really struggling with it, then I'll do a video on how to access materials, or how to work with certain technologies.
Thank you, Karen. We
Uh-huh.
have some additional questions. I think that this webinar is definitely getting some people thinking. So Jacqueline is asking, with the flipped classroom, do you have other assignments that you use as part of the course? And then we have another faculty member asking, how useful is flipped classroom strategy in a pre-licensure nursing class like fundamentals, since students may have a very small knowledge base at that point?
Oh yeah, these are great questions. Other assignments in the course. Now, typically your curriculum will have certain things that cannot be touched, cannot be moved, and we are the same way, or I have worked with programs that are the same way. So if there is a writing assignment, for example, like if there's a paper due, a big evidence-based practice paper, or a case study, for example, then I can't change those assignments. But many times what I'll do is a little assignment before they go home. It sometimes helps me with evaluation as well. So if we do the in-class activity, I think my biggest concern, and maybe you all can relate with this, is I'm worried that what I did, I wasn't able to reach every student. And like there's still somebody out there. It's harder for students who don't get the content to hide in the active classroom and flipped learning, but they can still do it because some of them are very savvy. So I want to make sure that I've caught everybody and that everybody's understanding. So what I'll do sometimes is I just hand out these little index cards. I should buy stock in those. I buy them all the time. And I hand them out and I have them put their name and their number, whatever it is on there. And then I have them put their take home points, and then questions unanswered. And I have them do that little assignment. And there was one semester I did that, and I had them do it every single flipped class that I did, and the students really liked it. And they said it gave me an opportunity to ask a question that I felt was kind of dumb to ask in front of everybody else, or that I thought everybody else got and I just didn't get, and I didn't want to ask it. But when you had me write it down, then that really helped me. Sometimes I have given some worksheets and things like that for them to do, but most often there isn't a whole lot of after work in the flipped classroom for me. It's all pre-work. So anything that I'm going to assign them, I'll have them do ahead of time. The only other difference to that would be if we were working on something, some subject or content, and somebody came up with a question that I couldn't answer, then sometimes I'll give the students an assignment to go look that up, find some evidence-based research for that, or topic or website or specialty person, and bring that information back to the next class. And then I give them a little teeny tiny sprinkle of extra credit because I don't like extra credit. I always tell my students that I give you everything you need to be successful at the beginning of the course, and that is what we're going to use as our measuring stick. But sometimes I do sprinkle a little extra credit stuff in there. Now, for pre-licensure, this is an interesting question because I think that the K-12 folks have taught us that you can flip any content. And some of the best content, I think, are the pre-licensure courses, like the core courses. So, for example, if you're working on ethics, this is awesome. So you do all the ethics concepts, beneficence, whatever you want to talk about, up front in your video before they come to class. Then you have them come to class and you have them engage that content. Maybe give them some ethical dilemmas that you're seeing in the news, right? And there's always something in the news. So I try to make it real time and really help the students engage that content with what's going on in their life. And that tends to make it a little bit more real and memorable for them. So I think that you can flip really any content and you can flip it successfully.
I think we have time for two more questions. So we have someone asking what capture app you use in the classroom. And then we have another faculty member asking how this pedagogy should be integrated. Should it be part of the entire curriculum or should it be integrated course by course?
Okay, very good. So capture apps. I tend to use Camtasia, Camtasia. It so far, I don't think they have an app for it, but you can download that on your PC or Mac. And that's how I do most, if not all, my videos, just because I like the capability, like I was saying during the presentation, of being able to go in and edit. That has saved me a lot of time because I make mistakes. And sometimes, for some reason, how long have I been a nurse and I still say subscription instead of prescription? There are just some things that you mess up. And then you can go back in and you can edit those out. So I like Camtasia a lot. If I was going to use my iPad, I like the oh no, I just lost I think it's called Show Me Everything, or oh no, I'm so sorry. I should have written it down. I think there's one called Show Me. Oh, I'm so sorry. Explain Everything. Explain Everything. And I am really stingy with my money on apps. I don't know if any of you are out there, but I'm like, if it's not like $3 or less, I'm not going there. And free apps are the best. And so that one's got to be under $5. But there are some other ones that are out there as well. The nice thing about those is that I like to PDF pictures by email to myself. For example, I did a cardiac lecture one time, and the students, I was worried that they, and this was undergrad physical assessment, I was thinking they probably need a little bit of review of the pathophysiology, and I didn't like any of the videos that were out there. Plus, there's some research showing that students really like their professors to do videos. They don't like generic videos. So I downloaded a PDF of a heart, sent it to myself by email, opened it up on Explain Everything, and then I started the recording and then used it as a whiteboard to show them what they needed to do. Then I was able to upload that back to myself and post it on their learning management system. So if you put capture or lecture capture or screen capture in on your search engine, you're going to come up with several different apps. And like I said, you can just find one that works really well for yourself. The integration question. Of course, being a proponent of flipped classroom, I feel like this has to be a curriculum thing. However, I work with a lot of people who don't think this has to be a curriculum thing for many of the reasons that I shared before about difficulty in paradigm shifts. And I completely understand that. I really do. And I think that there are some people that are very talented lecturers, and I'm not going to begrudge them at all. I think they do a wonderful job. But then there are other people that don't do as well. John Bergman really believes, particularly in the K-12 realm, that this should be integrated curricular wide. I hope I am not misspeaking, but I believe it's Harvard Medical School has gone completely flipped. And the one advantage that I can see being a lone pioneer of flipping on my campuses is that you would have much less kickback from your students. You would have much more engagement between faculty and more wonderful sharing of ideas and innovative ways to apply this. And just thinking about how you could flip case studies from one semester to the next and have them be ongoing is really exciting to think about, especially as we get more wonderful technologies like the iWall. I think that would be the best way to do it, but to be able to do that, you have to have buy-in. And right now, I think as a profession, we don't have a lot of buy-in with the flipped method so far. I am really positive, and I'm hoping that's going to change, just because when people start to flip, even just like one of their classes in the whole semester, they start to recognize that it is easier than they thought. The students had a lot of fun, and you know what? The faculty have more fun. You're not like a lecturer up there on a game show saying, you know, I'll take blood flow for 500. You are able to engage with them, ask them questions, they ask you questions. It's just a really great way to engage with the students. And quite honestly, this is why I wanted to be an instructor, because I was working with students in the clinical realm and I was able to have them one-on-one and do this kind of instruction. And it's very, very meaningful, in my opinion.
Karen, I think that we covered a lot of questions. We answered, I believe, everyone's questions today.
Great.
And I do want to take this time to thank you very much for joining us again
Mm-hmm.
for a really informative webinar. This is definitely a hot topic and something that's on top of mind as, folks try to figure out how they can integrate technology. I do just want to reiterate a couple of the URLs we have here on this last slide. If you'd like to share this webinar, we will have it posted shortly to our YouTube channel, and you can find that at go.jblearning.com/flippedwebinar. You can learn more flipped classroom tips. Karen is also frequently a guest blogger on the nursing blog for Jones and Bartlett Learning, so you can catch some tips from her. And we do invite you to use the code FLIP2018 to take 25% off the purchase of Karen's textbook. So again, thanks everyone for joining us today, and a big thank you to Karen Hessler for sharing some fantastic tips for flipping the classroom. Have a great day, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you all.